Welcome to the third in a series of presentations that the Dunbar Earthquake and Emergency Preparedness Committee is organizing here in Dunbar this year alone. For this presentation, we have the pleasure of welcoming Dr. Carlos Ventura from the UBC Engineering Department. He has been working there for 31 years, and before that, he was working on civil engineering projects in Texas and California, a lot of them dealing with earthquake damage and assessment and preparation. So without further ado, I believe, how many people do we have online? We have 7 people online. We have 3 people in the audience, and we have 3 people standing here. So we're pretty well. I'll pass it over now to Dr. Carlos Ventura for his presentation.
Thank you. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to speak both to the screen or to the camera and also to you. The purpose of this presentation today is to talk about something that is perhaps of interest to everybody, but is kind of an obscure topic, which is how the soil conditions under a building will affect its behavior. Okay. So we're just going to go through some slides showing what earthquakes can cause in a built structure, and then we'll focus on what is the issue about soil conditions and what is happening if your house is on rock or if your house is built on soft soil, and what can you expect, and at the end we'll see what can we do to minimize the damage on that soil. Okay. So let's start with this slide here, and this is just a cartoon to show how the earthquake motion propagates through the media. So in this case, we have what we call the source are all the possible faults or where earthquakes can generate. Some of those will be close to the surface, or there will be hundreds of kilometers below the surface, and that's what we call the hypocenter location. So the rupture happens, and then the point where the rupture initiates is what we call the hypocenter. And if we project that to the surface, this is what we call the epicenter. Okay, so whenever we read a report of an earthquake that has happened in certain part of the world, it says magnitude 7 at 50 kilometers or 200 kilometers for a given city. That's the epicentral distance. But the depth of the earthquake is also important. It could be 500 kilometers below the surface, but only 50 kilometers to the city. Okay. So as the waves are generated, they start propagating through the soil, and they go in many directions, and then they will reach the surface, and they will start, if there is a building or if a structure built there, it's going to start shaking. Okay. But it's going to shake very differently if the building is on solid rock, okay, or if the building is founded in what we call soil. Okay, soil is material that is looser, like compared to rock. Okay. For example, if your house is near Queen Elizabeth Park, we have a very good soil, almost rock conditions there. That same house will be shaking differently than if that house is in Richmond or in certain areas, because the shaking will be very different, and we're going to see the consequences of that shaking. And you see in the list here, the shaking depends on many things. Although we are always told the magnitude of the earthquake was 6 or 8 or 9, we also have to consider how far are we from the epicenter of the hypocenter of the earthquake, the path that the ground is taking, and the site conditions. And the talk that we're having today is what is the meaning of site conditions and how we deal with that. Okay. All right. So these curves that you're going to see here, I call them squiggly lines, but this is nothing more than how we measure the intensity of the shaking on the ground. Okay. These are usually accelerometers that will measure the time and the intensity of the acceleration. And I'm going to show a few examples of. But you'll see that the signature of these records is very different, right? The signature of the record on rock is very fast and high intensity and called high frequencies, whereas the signature in soil is more gentle, larger amplitudes, and that has a significant impact in construction. Okay. All right. So as the waves are propagating, the earthquake problem is very complicated because we have discussed in the past, or we have seen presentations where we talk about the P waves or the S waves, okay? And the P wave is a compression wave that travels this way, okay? From the source of the earthquake to the site where you are. And those waves are generally not damaging because the motion is like this, compressed. It's like a slinky. When you see the slinky plane, that's how it's a P wave, okay? And that's a very fast wave, maybe 8 or 7 kilometers per second. After that, we follow that with the S waves, which is the surface wave, and also that goes in the ground, moving in all directions. And that's the one that causes the damage in buildings and structures, and then other ways, but we're just going to talk about these two because these are important. So as the S waves and the follow-up waves that I'll call love waves, not because they are in love, but because it's named after a scientist that his last name was Love, and another type of wave that is like a rolling wave on the ocean is called Rayleigh waves. So all of these S waves and the Love waves and the Rayleigh waves cause problems. Okay? And if the structure is not well designed, as you can see here, it collapses. Okay, and this is an interesting case because it was a parking garage in Northridge in California that had been recently built according to code. So you say, if the engineer followed the code, why is that the building collapse or this building collapse? And because there was one error, one weakness in the connections between the columns and the beams that supported the parking, the ramps on that. And that error caused the collapse of that. So it's not only being designing a building according to code, but be sure that all the connections are properly done. And if they are not, then even the most modern building could collapse in an earthquake. Okay. Other effect of the earthquake is what is called surface faulting. The faults are usually hundreds of kilometers below the surface, but sometimes they come to the surface and they create this motion. Okay. And as you can see how the displacement happening, in this case, the towers fail because the motion of the ground caused that one. And we're going to see some examples of the earthquake in Turkey where this is very prevalent. How much is this motion going to happen? Okay. In this case, you are in one side of the fault and the other side might move 1 meter, 2 meters. Okay. In some cases, we have seen displacements of about 5 meters or 6 meters. The earthquake in Japan in 2011, the Tohoku earthquake, had a vertical displacement of about 25 meters. 25? 25 meters in the ocean. Meters? Yes, and that's why it caused the tsunami, right? Because it's like 600 kilometers of fault displacing 25 meters at the same time. It pumps a lot of water and then creates a tsunami. Okay. So another effect is what is called liquefaction. Okay, liquefaction is a phenomenon where certain type of material, usually sandy material that is saturated, when the shaking starts, and these high frequencies that I mentioned make the particles of sand separate, and because it's saturated with water, it becomes liquid for a moment. So although it's solid sand, it becomes like liquid, and then anything that is on top of that now is resting on liquid, and then something like this happens. This is a very unique photo from the Niigata, Japan in 1964, where you see the buildings didn't collapse. They just turned over. And then nobody was killed here, but people had to slide down the walls to get out of the building, right? And it happens. And in this case, it's the Alaska earthquake. Liquefaction cut that school in half, but because it happened early in the morning, nobody was hurt, right? But if there had been children there, it would have been a very different story, right? So liquefaction is important. Do we have liquefaction here? Yes, okay. Anything near the delta, okay, and Richmond and Delta, some parts of Falls Creek is that type of soil that could potentially liquefy in an earthquake, right? So
Some parts of Falls Creek and stuff we filled in.
yes, yeah, sometimes, yeah. But if you do it properly, if it's done with all the engineering knowledge that we have today, you can minimize the effect of liquefaction, right?
Yeah, but they went to English Bay and dumped sand.
Yeah, but and this is your point, because this is the Bay Area in San Francisco in 1989. It was exactly like that. This is Marina District in San Francisco, where the earthquake happens, and all was that reclaimed land that they dumped soil there, these very fancy, expensive apartments, and that's a consequence of that. So of course, it has been corrected now. There are techniques to reduce liquefaction.
Question, please.
Yes.
When the old Stones building was excavated, I remember seeing tons of sand, really sand. And I wondered about that. It's dry sand because it's up on the hill here.
Yeah.
Liquefaction possible or not like?
Not in dry sand, because it has to be saturated with water, right? So because as the waves are coming, they are producing pressure in the water, in the saturated soil, and the pressure makes the particles separate. But if there is no water, there is no liquefaction. There will be other issues like the shaking of the ground, etc., but not liquefaction in general. Yes?
When they put up buildings in Richmond, I noticed the first put a large pile of soil and squeeze the water in the sand.
Exactly. That's the whole idea too. It's called consolidate the material, right? You put that pressure for a number of years. It's like if you go to the beach and you get close to the beach and you stand there, you start sinking, right? With your bare feet. And if you shake it a little bit, then at some point you don't sink anymore. What you have done is create a little liquefaction there and then squeeze all the water out of that, and now the material is more stable. Yeah.
Doesn't the water go back into that soil kind of from the side?
Yeah, then you have to do some other things like create waste for the water to drain. Yeah, so that's important to do it.
So preloading produces a solid base to build on.
Yeah.
But with my understanding, it's not going to innate by some texture. It's not going to protect which liquefaction.
No, it's going to protect the building that is built in there.
Preloaded.
Yeah, preloaded. It's protecting the building, but the street could liquefy because it's not been preloaded, right?
Well, and the side of it, so that as you explained, as you saw that Japanese, they fall over.
Yeah. But
The side's gone.
but they have learned a lot, okay? And there is a new technology being developed to. You cannot minimize completely the effect of liquefaction, but you can reduce it to the level that the buildings will behave okay. Yeah. Okay. And the other problem is landslides. Okay, these are secondary effects that we call, and those landslides could be very deadly because the earthquake happens, and sometimes it takes about 45 minutes or so for the landslide to develop. Right, so sometimes it's immediate. Other times, this is California as well, and then the other one is Alaska. In '64, all of this part here just went down into the ocean. Big chunk of soil.
And is that because the land on the hill, the soil on the hill is more likely to have some kind of liquefaction type?
Sometimes it's a liquefaction. Sometimes it's just the shaking loosens the soil, and then the soil comes down.
Just a quick note, the people online can't hear any of it.
Okay.
So if you could repeat a little bit before you answer them.
Perfect. Okay. Thanks for reminding me, Christian. And another problem for fire following, right? And where is that problem here? Vancouver downtown has a problem with fire following because the alleys between the buildings, there is a lot of junk there and lots of material that could ignite, and it has been could potentially produce fire. And this is again the Marina district in Loma Prieta. Liquefaction ruptured the gas lines, and also the power lines ruptured, spark, fire produces. So that was because of the gas that came loose and created this fire, and then affected the construction.
Can you speak then to, is this not a significant issue in the Falls Creek Flat that we just shoved in what we had from the cut and then we shoved in sand? Is that not the pipes moving?
Yeah, the question is, the question is, if we dump sand and build material, and then we're going to have all the infrastructure there, like pipelines and power lines, etc. This is a consequence of not planning properly, okay? This was done in California in the early 1900s, 1940s, whenever Marina District started. We don't do that anymore, okay? This is what we call lessons learned from earthquakes, that we learn from that, and now there are regulations and guidelines to prevent this from happening, right? At least if you're going to build in what we call reclaimed area where you're dumping sand, you have to be sure that the sand is properly compacted, that you don't have liquefaction, and all your infrastructure like pipelines, etc., can accommodate the motion, right? That's what we do. And this is what the city has been doing in many areas, replacing pipelines, etc., to allow this motion to happen. Okay. All right, and the other effect, to finish this discussion, is the tsunami. Okay. As I mentioned, the tsunami will occur if the earthquake is offshore, okay, and earthquake onshore will not create a tsunami, okay. Although if there is a big lake, it will create what is called the siege, which is a tsunami wave that will generate in the reservoir. But typically, we have the fault here west of Vancouver Island. And if that fault creates this vertical motion that I was calling, and then multiply this vertical motion 10, 15, 20 meters by 800 or 900 kilometers, then you have lots of water that is going to be mobilized. Okay, the wave that is generated, then it will travel very fast, like at the speed of an airplane. It's a small wave, it's not a big wave in the area of the fault. And that's going to travel at 800 kilometers an hour. And then when it reaches the shore, the speed slows down to about 40 kilometers an hour, but the height of the wave increases to about 20, 30 meters. And that's in that question, yeah.
Carlos, if the delta front of the Fraser River had an underwater slide, it's not quite a displacement, but does it create the same?
Yeah, like any slide on the water will create a wave. Okay, tsunami is the word in Japanese. Let's say big wave in a port. Okay, that's the Japanese translation. But for a wave that is generated by a landslide, we call it sometimes siege. Okay, and the most dramatic case is in Alaska in the 1980s, I guess, where a big chunk of a mountain came into a lagoon, okay, and that created a wave that was almost 1 kilometer high. Yeah, because a lot of material came down, right? So there was a big landslide that went into the water, and that created a wave that was reported to be almost 1 kilometer high. Okay, it didn't propagate like a tsunami over a large distance, right? It just was affecting that area there. So you can Google that because there are many dramatic cases like that where landslides cause a big wave that can destroy many things. Okay, so let's move on. All right, so we talk about how the soil will affect, right? So, but it will affect buildings in a different way. Okay, so I have this little cartoon animation that shows a short building and a tall building. Let's say you're in downtown Vancouver, you're probably in a tall building. Here we're in Dunbar, we are in a smaller building. Okay, so the waves are like these figures here. They have different intensity and frequencies, and the buildings also have their own frequencies or resonance. So let's see the first animation. We're going to have an earthquake. Okay. It's just that I changed my pointer, so. Sorry for that. Okay, so you see in this case, the wave is moving almost in resonance with the tall building. It's a very gentle wave. We call it a low frequency wave. And if you're in downtown, you are for a ride of your life in one of these new high-rise buildings there. Okay. Yeah. Now, this is another type of earthquake where you see it's more high frequency. Now, if you're in downtown, you're laughing because people here in Dunbar are having their houses shaking a lot. Okay. So the earthquake has effects in different areas on different buildings depending on the soil conditions under that. And we were talking about Richmond and the Falls Creek and the reclaimed area, etc. Is how we engineers understand the type of waves that will reach the building that will cause the problem. Okay. So how do we improve the design of buildings, etc. is by learning from earthquakes. Okay. And here is a list of significant earthquakes that we have seen in the last 3 decades. Okay, there's more, but these are very significant earthquakes that have helped us improve the building codes and the bridge codes, islands, and etc. And what I'd like to show you is something that just we experienced recently, which is the Turkey earthquake in February of this year. Okay, and here is a clear example of how complicated is this? Okay. The earthquake in Turkey, in fact, was 2 earthquakes. Okay. One, which is Karamanlis, Turkey. This is the city, magnitude 7.7, at a very shallow depth, about 9 kilometers. That's a very shallow earthquake. Okay, typically a deeper earthquake will be 200, 500 kilometers, etc. Right. So the shallower the earthquake is, or the closer the hypocenter to the surface, the more devastating it could be the earthquake, because the certain of energy is right there. Okay. 9 hours later, another earthquake happened of magnitude 7.6. Okay. The first one was in Pasarik, and then the Elbistan, the second one, 9 hours later. Okay. Now, here is what is quite interesting. Okay. So we're talking about this region in the world. Turkey here is a region in terms of earthquakes. All this region has been affected by earthquakes over the years and over the centuries. There is a lot of historical events, and Turkey is one that is very active. And here's a map of Turkey. These red lines are the major faults that exist in Turkey. Okay, this is called the North Anatolian Fault. Okay, Istanbul is here, and many of the earthquakes that have occurred in these past centuries tend to get closer and closer to Istanbul. Okay. So there is a speculation that at some point an earthquake is going to happen exactly in Istanbul, and that will be a bit different story. Now, the earthquake that we're talking about is in this fault, okay, which is what is called the eastern branch of the Anatolian Fault. Okay, the Anatolian Fault is very similar to another fault that we have here up north, which is called the Queen Charlotte's Fault. Queen Charlotte's Fault is from Hawaii all the way down up to Alaska. And that fault is very similar to the one in San Andreas in California, the San Andreas Fault. So all these faults, they move this way. It's called right lateral, okay? But instead of moving this way, they move laterally, okay? And so this fault. So as you can see, it's a very complicated processing because we have all these faults here, all these faults here, okay? In 1999, there was an earthquake in Turkey, in Izmit, somewhere here, and that caused the Turkish to improve their building codes. And they changed their building code to the point that even today, that building code is one of the most modern and more advanced codes in the world. And they started changing all the construction in Istanbul to meet the building code because of the lessons learned from that earthquake. Question? No, that's, yeah, of course.
Can you repeat?
Yeah, the question, I was telling that the building code improved, and they started retrofitting many buildings, but not all the buildings were changed. And that's what happened in this region here. That because although they knew that there was earthquake activity, they haven't had a major earthquake in so many years. This is an area where about 11 million people live, okay? And there are many, many cities. And the buildings that were built here were mostly before the 1999 building code. And the ones that were built after 99, problem was corruption, okay? Bad construction, not the design itself, but the construction is the one that caused the problem, okay? All right, so, and this is the region in the old one of the states. Now you can see one earthquake is here and the other one is here, okay? So it's not the same fault. It's two faults that they are connected to each other that caused the earthquake, and that's why it was so devastating, okay? I want to show you this video, and I wanted to see how the ground is moving, okay? And you'll see how complicated is that. So and you see that the motion, this is during the earthquake, is a vertical motion, okay? And it's moving laterally, okay? And this is one of the events in the morning, right? I think that happens around 4 in the morning, the first event, and now the second event. So this is perhaps the first time we have actual footage in the area, and you see how the motion was so severe. It's not only horizontal, but vertical. Okay. Now, the consequence of that motion is this, okay? So this is the city, okay? The fault goes here. You could see it, I'll see it, and you'll see what happens before and after, okay? So again, this is a simulation there. You see how things change, okay? So this is the fault. So everything near the fault is pretty much destroyed because the intensity of the shaking is so large, okay? And even if a building is designed to the most modern code, for that level of shaking, the building will not collapse, but will have severe damage, okay? The building code philosophy is that for a level of shaking of this level, you should be able to walk out of the building. The building will have all kinds of cracks and it will look ugly, but you should be, okay. That's the code philosophy of that, okay? Because you can build a bunker there, but it will be very expensive, and if you never have the earthquake, you'll lose your money, okay? So the code philosophy is to say, for a small earthquake, no damage. For an intermediate earthquake, some level of damage that can be repaired. And for a very large earthquake, no collapse. Accept damage, but no collapse. Of course, this is changing now, okay? So you can see the effect there, how this changed, okay? So this is how much the ground moved. You can see the evidence here. This is a few meter displacement. And we call that permanent displacement. The ground shakes, but at the same time moves and stays there, okay? And the earthquake in Japan in 2011, Japan became bigger after the earthquake, moved about 6 meters out into the ocean, right? So this is the amount of motion that could happen. Okay, now this is perhaps the most impacting effect because we have photos of the city before and after, okay? Before and after, and you see all the destruction, and that was comment, right? Why are these buildings collapsed and this is not, okay? There are a few buildings that are still intact, okay? And this is what we do as well. There are a lot of people that study why the buildings collapse. The research that my team and I am doing at UBC is why these buildings didn't collapse, okay? Are they because they are well designed or they were lucky? Or what happened that make the building survive? Okay. But the consequence of this severe ground shaking and all these catastrophic collapses that we see there and so many people losing their lives was because a combination of the soil conditions, this is a softer soil condition there, poor construction, as we have been seeing in the news, right? And bad luck to be in the building at that time, in that case. So that's consequence of that. So I go to Turkey in a few weeks, and we're going to study, spend a week there talking that, and next time I'll come and I'll share with you what we learned from that. Okay, so just to wrap this up is how do we use information for us here in BC? Okay, so we have generated what's called the soil hazard map. And I'm going to show you 2 examples and how we deal with this issue about soft soils and how it's done in the code. Okay, so remember we talk about the P wave, which is the compression wave, and the S wave, which is the surface wave that causes a lot of damage. So one parameter that we use to understand whether a soil is very stiff or very soft is the velocity of the shear wave. Okay. So the higher the velocity of the shear wave, the stiffer the soil is. Like a rock will have velocities of 1,000 meters per second. Okay. And soft soil will have velocities of 1/10 of that, more or less in general, right? So in the building code, we have this table, okay, that when an engineer is going to design a building, we'll go to this table and work with the geotechnical engineer, and the geotechnical engineer will tell the engineer what site class we have, okay, A, B, C, and D, okay. Class A is a hard rock, class E is a soft soil, okay. And these are the shear wave velocities, okay, and there are methods to determine that, but this is how we do it in the building code. There is some new technologies being developed, but traditionally this is a simple way to understand the soil conditions, okay. So, as I say, if you are in Queen Elizabeth Park, your shear wave velocities will be of the order of 1,500 meters per second, and if you are in the Delta Richmond area, you'll be on this area here, soft soils, where your velocity are about 1/10 of that. Okay. So in general, okay. So with that, we can generate a map, for example, of the Lower Mainland here, where through a number of studies done by geologists and investigating every site, we can generate a map that tells us the areas, for example, we have pretty good soil, AB, that will be in the North Shore here, right? And you see the pockets where we have good soils, and then we can go to the soil class E, which is the softer soil, okay? And then we have obviously the Richmond area, but you see not all the Richmond area is that bad, okay? But the airport is in class E soil, and that's not good because it's a soft soil, okay? So these are pictures that will allow us to take a quick look at where in the Lower Mainland we could expect more severe shaking. Let's say if we have an earthquake in an epicenter here, okay, then it's going to start affecting Richmond. Downtown Vancouver will be affected differently because soil conditions there are very different of the good type of soil that we have. This will be Pitt River, going to Langley, etc. So here's the Fraser River. The question is, what is this area here? But we see the Fraser River goes here, the North Fork, and then you go into the Chilliwack and all these areas there. Okay. All right, so and this is going to be posted on the website of of deep if you want to see it. Now, if I take you now, question.
What is hard pan?
What?
Hard pan. It's very dense. It's a kind of soil that we have in Vancouver. You can see it in the cliffs on the far end side.
A layer of iron. It's compacted soil. Very hard.
Let's go.
Iron.
Compacted sand.
Iron.
Okay,
Very high in iron.
I didn't know that. Good. Harpan. Harpan is, that's the name? Yeah.
It's not rock. It's
It's very stiff soil. Yeah.
very stiff metallic soil.
Yeah.
It's usually only very.
Okay, we're running out of time, so I'm that close. Now, if I take you to Victoria, Victoria is more complicated. As you can see, this is the downtown area, and you can see that there are pockets where you have good soils and pockets where you have not so good soils, right? Again, the green is the ABC type soils, good soils, and the red is D and E, and the intense red is pretty bad soil in the area, right? So all of these maps are used we study for the Victoria to determine what will be the effect of an earthquake in Victoria, not the big one that everybody's talking about, a magnitude 7 earthquake at about 100 kilometers from Victoria. What will be the consequence of that earthquake in terms of damage to infrastructure? And for that, we accounted for the soil conditions. The most recent change in Victoria is that there is a fault somewhere here that is called the Devil Mountains Fault. Okay, and the Devil Mountains Fault is a fault that is right through Victoria, and it is a magnitude 7 or so in there. And if that ever happens, then we'll see exactly the same as we are seeing in Turkey this time, because the fault is right in Victoria. Okay. So to summarize this, we have in stiff soil, the ground shaking. This is just to illustrate the process. Will be very high frequency and certain intensity. But as the waves are propagating upwards to the soft soil, then the intensity of the motion increases and the motion changes its characteristics. And those motions are the ones that we use to analyze buildings, etc., to estimate their response. So here's an actual example of records obtained in Loma Prieta. You can see the rock motion, and this is the subsoil. Okay, this is there is if you remember in San Francisco going to Oakland, there is a couple of islands in between. One is called the Yerba Buena Island, and the other is called the Treasure Island. Yerba Buena Island is where the bridge is founded. It's rock, okay, and the motion was there. And in Treasure Island, which is off the bridge there was a lot of liquefaction, and the motion, although this is 1 kilometer apart, the motion was very, very different from one side to the other. Okay. And this is why the ground motions are important. Okay.
So do you get, if you have a hard area adjacent to a soft area in layman's terms, do you get amplification in the soft area due to its juxtaposition with the hard area?
Yeah, okay. The question is, if you have an area where you have stiff soil and next to that you have a softer area, the obvious thing is you're going to see an amplification of the motion from the stiff area to the soft area. That's what we call ground motion amplification.
So
Yeah.
Victoria, there is potential for that.
There is potential for that in all those
Because of that sort of patchwork
of
soil conditions and the fault line running through it.
Yeah, so in Victoria, we're going to see is this variation, even at block-to-block changes, right? Because some blocks are showing very good soil conditions. The next block will show this subsoil. So you're going to see big differences in how the buildings will behave in that case. And this is what we do these studies.
What would you expect of a building that's built partly on hard soil, partly on soft soil?
Okay, that's a good question. But if a building is built part of the building is in subsoil and part is in hard soil, well, first of all, you'll never build a building like that. But today, yeah, because you will be sure that everything is in the stiff soil part. But if you have that case, then you will have to do a seismic retrofit to ensure that the part of the building in the soft soil has better foundation than the other part that is in hard soil. It will have to be a large building, right? But it's possible. Right? We see that in bridges, because in a bridge, it's most likely that you have one end of the bridge on very stiff and at the other end on soft soil. Like when they designed the new Portman Bridge, they have to account for that because each side of the Fraser River had different soil conditions. Right? Yeah, so it's possible.
So it's my understanding that when the CPR opened up Cochino from 16th to 32nd from our view to McDonald, that it was swampy and they went down to English Bay and got sand and filled it in. But that doesn't show up on here, on your.
Yeah, because this the picture that I show you here, it doesn't, because this was done collection of data over the years, right? And if you want to zoom into that area, these maps are what is called general maps. Okay, if you are interested in that area, so then a study will have to be done specifically for the area that you have. So these are just there is a project now being done by the Ministry of by the provincial government. Is called microzonation. Okay, and microzonation is to develop in very detailed maps of this area. This is a very coarse map, right? But next year there will be a release of a map that will be with better information, more detail. And the idea is that the map will be on the internet. You click on that, and it's going to give you more detailed
So the
information.
area I talked about was basically built up in 40, so
Yeah.
it doesn't have any of our modern stuff.
Well,
I believe you can, 'cause I saw this slide before. The color usually from King Edward, the color from King Edward down to Jericho is D. It's a yellow color. You can't see it on this projection, but it is given a worse soil condition than the rest of Vancouver.
yeah, so yeah, thanks, Colin. The colors are not very clearly shown here, but when you look at the map and you can zoom, you'll see better information. Okay, we are over time, so I think the last part is just to with this what we can do about to protect our homes. Okay, and I listed a number of recommendations that are going to be included in the presentation, but I'll just quickly mention what's important. Okay, a house is developed to house you. Okay, it has to have the components that resist the gravity load, resist the weight of the roof, the floors, etc. But for the earthquake resistance, the important thing, the capacity to resist lateral shaking. So we have to ensure that our homes have enough capacity to resist the forces that are produced by the earthquake. So in simple terms, if you remember when you went to studying physics in high school, you talk about Newton's law. Okay? And Newton's second law is, we say, force equal mass times acceleration. Okay? So the acceleration is given by the earthquake, and the mass is the mass of the building. So the bigger the mass, the larger the forces. The larger the forces, the more resistance you have to provide to your building to resist shaking. Okay. So the elements that resist lateral loads are the floors, okay, the diaphragms, and these are the horizontal elements, okay, like here, the floor, and the shear are the elements, vertical elements that are used to resist earthquake shaking. Okay, so essentially saying what steps can we take to minimize the effect of that? And the first step is to learn from earthquakes, learn what they do and what damage they cause. And then once we understand that better, we can then take steps necessary to improve even our existing construction. So I call this the site factor, okay, and this is listed here. Are you close to trees that are close to your house? Okay. Because if a tree falls down, then you have damage on the house, right? But all these recommendations, and it's already posted there, it will be, is to identify what we call the earthquake hazards, okay? Weaknesses on your building, connections that are not properly done, or for example, in some of the houses that we have here that were built in the 1920s, the connection between the basement and the first floor, called that crippled wall, is very weak, okay? So my home here in Dunbar and 16, we remodeled that many years ago. I have this crippled wall, so I just put plywood walls all around the house to ensure a good connection between the concrete base and the first floor of the house. Things like that can help a lot to minimize the effects of earthquakes and help you with that. Okay. We talk about the soil factor. In summary, okay, we have good soil and bad soil. This is a takeaway from here. The poor soil is loose sand, okay, silty clays, sand and gravel, soft and saturated granular soils. Okay. And good soil is ideally bedrock type or very steep soil, okay, that will help minimize the intensity of the shaking. And even if the house was built in 1920s without any seismic design consideration, if it's on rock, it has a better chance of surviving an earthquake without any damage than a house in subsoil. Question?
Not many homes are built directly on the
Houses are built in bedrock.
This is more like if you have bedrock close to
Yeah, it's as I was saying, if you're in the Queen Elizabeth Park area, those are very close to the rock outcrop, right? And in downtown area, there is also some areas that in the North Shore, there are areas where you have rock outcrop. That will be great, right? But the majority in the area is in the soil, so that's where we have to ensure that everything is connected.
While we're stuck, we had a question from Brian. Brian, do you want to ask?
I'm not sure. I don't. Why don't I wait till the end because it had to do with a slide in the middle.
Okay.
Okay, that's just 2 minutes. Okay, so I also included this. It's in the presentation. It's just list what I was saying, tying everything up. So it's steel straps, anchor bolts. Okay, anchor bolts to anchor the foundation to the house. That's very critical. And if we are able to anchor all the houses to the foundation properly, we have solved a lot of the problems in damaging, because everything is tied up. And also in the upper parts of the house, be sure that the connections between beams and floors are well done. Okay, and these are not necessarily that expensive retrofits. Typically, if you are doing a remodeling of the house, that's a good time to do the retrofit because it will be much cheaper. In fact, even much cheaper than remodeling your kitchen. Sometimes it is. Okay. So this is really the concept, okay? What I call the load path, okay? The load path is how you visualize the forces going from the roof all the way to the foundation. Okay. Although the ground shaking is the one moving, but because of Newton's law, the inertia forces are going to be generated in the construction. So you want to ensure that these forces can find a path to travel all the way down to the foundation, and that's why I was saying good anchoring of the foundation, good anchoring of the beams and columns here and to the roof, and that will make a very solid structure that will have a better chance to resist an earthquake. Okay, these are additional notes that you can read yourselves, but I already discussed many of those things, and I just put those for your reference. And okay, and that's a list of references that I suggested that you can about that. Okay, thank you. Okay, Brian. Thank you. Sure.
Hi, Carlos. Great talk as usual.
Thank you, Brian.
I had a question. I saw a site classification in the middle of your talk that looked like it was E plus or E minus. I couldn't quite read it.
Yeah, okay.
What is that?
Okay, remember, let me go back to this table, Brian. You see, for engineering terms, these classes, A, B, C, Ds, are very generic classifications, but you see the shear wave velocities here, they vary a lot. For example, class B, 760 to 1500, right? So in some cases, to have a better definition of what is a good soil, we call it like a B plus is close to A, but it's not an A. It's like it's how you grade the students at university.
So is that? But I just saw it looked like it was maybe the following slide or the previous slide. It looked like in sort of like in some areas in Richmond
Yeah.
and in Southlands, there was a darker color, but it looked like it says E plus.
Yeah, like this one here, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. This is because some geotechnical investigation has been done and it has been identified that these are very soft soil. Like class E is the one that is could potentially liquefied. The one that we know that is going to liquefy with class F. So E plus will be, in this case, the opposite of the scale, will be more problematic because it's a soil that will be very soft. It's a pocket of material that will amplify the ground shaking more severely than the E definition.
So would I mean, I see, let's say, just say, for example, where you are in the community center, and where I am nearby, which is on more, I guess, dense soil. And then could there be interactions between that soil and the soil down in the EE plus going, I mean, some application going in the direction of the E plus?
No, this is very localized, Brian. Okay, let's assume if you're looking at here, let's say that the earthquake is generated where I am, and the ground motion is propagating here, right? As it reaches this area, the intensity of the shaking will be increased, but then when it reaches the boundary, it decreases and it keeps propagating. And depending on it's like a ball of gelatin, right? When you hit it, the gelatin will shake, but outside the ball, nothing will happen. Right? That's the whole idea or the whole concept of these pockets where we know that the intensity will be higher here, but doesn't mean that it's going to affect directly the areas where the soil is different. Right? Yeah. It's a way propagating to a medium that is changing.
Yeah. Thank you, Carlos. Good to see
question.
you. It's nice to see you.
Thank you. Likewise. Yeah. Another question. Yeah.
This is more just to add on to this. The Geological Survey of Canada has an excellent map showing the superficial geology of North Plains, down by oil pits. It's quite a bit of evidence, showing like certain pockets and all through Vancouver. But I think there's also things like you could have right here where we are in Memorial Park. There used to be a creek. You're rich towards Iowa, so after those houses exist, you might end up having something kind of more unstable than you would with houses just even a few meters away.
You want to put that link up when you post that?
I actually have the map physically, like it's about 12 feet long. It's quite, I don't have a means of doing that, but they do publish a map.
Yeah. You can also find it in the BC Geological Survey, the British Columbia Geological Survey. They have all the geological maps in the province and very detailed.
Bontain Insurance was looking for a cheaper house insurance for me. And they said that there's many areas of Vancouver that they will not issue earthquake insurance. And only certain V6s or whatever will. So he says it's an old map or something and they're not up to date.
Yeah, they're probably using this map
Yeah.
because this has been circulating for many years. And as I say, the site condition map is being updated with this microzonation project. The geological maps exist for a long, long time, right? So we have the geology maps, and also we have the site condition maps that are the ones that are used for design, and also the insurance industry uses those in a very coarse manner.
Hopefully they'll update soon.
Yes.
I've got a question here from Susan online. I'm curious as to how post-disaster criteria are decided in Metro Vancouver, i.e. for public buildings and also high-rises. Are they meant to only allow for survivability, or would they also be designed so that they could still be inhabited after an earthquake?
Fantastic question. And the short answer is no. Well, the buildings, according to the building code of today, okay, which is the National Building Code of Canada, edition 2020. Okay, the philosophy is that if you design a building or a house according to that code, as I mentioned earlier, you're going to see damage for a very severe earthquake. Okay, so they are designed to protect you, not to necessarily protect the building. Okay, now there is a new trend that is being developed, and this is how things are changing, which is the sustainability and resiliency. That's what we call. And the resiliency will be the process where you're going to design a building to survive the earthquake, to protect you, and also to allow you to enter the building immediately after the earthquake. That's what it's called the resiliency. How soon can you go back to the building after a major earthquake? Unfortunately, that's starting to happen, but we don't have any buildings like that. For the post-earthquake evaluation, BC Housing has taken the lead in developing guidelines of how to do that. And in fact, we are in the process of discussing that with the group involved with BC Housing, and how do we prioritize the post-earthquake evaluation. We have developed, I say we because I have been part of that, but BC Housing has taken the lead, developing post-earthquake evaluation guidelines that will allow people like all of us to take steps to evaluate a building, and at some point, if the building is so damaged, call an engineer to do a more detailed evaluation. So that's already in place, and if you go to the website of BC Housing, you'll see the documents that are already there. What we are discussing now is the strategy to prioritize which is inspected first. Okay, are we going to look at hospitals first, or are we going to look to retired homes? Okay, or what will be inspected first and what will be given priority, and then it's depending on the size of the earthquake, of course, right? But with this information, like the soil map, other tools that we have, we can start seeing where are the areas where the most damage will occur, and then start concentrating the efforts in there by taking a look at what's in there. Do we have schools? Do we have hospitals? Do we have retirement homes? And who will be serviced first? So it's happening now. The year will have the priorities. Yeah.
I was recently, about 20 years ago, used to have any sort of earthquake criteria at all. Is that
Good question. It's related to the evolution of the building code in Canada. Building code in Canada started in the 1940s. So that's the first edition. Additionally, 5 years, there is improvement. But there was a period of time where the building is divided in chapters or parts. And part 4 residential the building code said that any housing is in BC should be designed according to Part 4 unless something happens. There is an exclusionary thing that says if it's a house, it's a small house or whatever fits certain criteria, you don't need to do a scientific design because naturally the house will have capacity to resist it. But that's a great point that this is the evolution of the
So, come over to
You got to give me a hug.
So there's the impression that people in single-family houses, because they're 1 or 2 stories, are less likely to be affected by a major earthquake than one taller building. Maybe you can stuff.
Yeah, good question. And remember that simulation cartoon that I showed you, a tall building shaking differently than a small building? This is what we know now, okay? That although traditional construction has performed well in earthquakes, there are cases where they don't, because soil conditions affect that, the quality of the construction affect that. To me, when we started the Monster homes in the 1980s, that we created these big houses with big opening areas, that's that's a type of building that I would be concerned about, because it has very little resistance. There is no load path. And that's what motivated the changes in the code. Say, no. You go to Part 4, and if you check some things in the Part 4 that says, oh, we can also build a house without seismic. Unless, for example, if you are in the lower mainland, yes, but we're going to start going back east, right? If you go to Guatemala or Chile, because the seismic intensity is going to be less, then you don't have to follow the building code. But if you're in Vancouver, Victoria, Vancouver Island, definitely yes.
So are you suggesting that there should be or should we get as accurate as that map there? And when we're building on the heavy red in that map, they've got to do extra stuff.
Yeah, okay. Good question. The way it works here is both. We have the National Building Code that is for all Canada. Every province will adopt the building code, and then they create the provincial building code. Here in BC, we have the provincial building code, which is the legal document that an engineer will have to follow to design any structure, the house or building. So the provincial building code follows the national building code, and then you have the municipalities that will add bylaws. For example, Richmond, because of the liquefaction, we have additional bylaws on top of the provincial building code to ensure that anything that we do there has to do with liquefaction. Vancouver has also the bylaws that require other things in addition to. For example, all housing in Vancouver, the Vancouver municipality has to be designed according to seismic code. That's part of the bylaw. So we go national building code, which is the national code, but it's not legally enforceable. We have the provincial building code, which is the legal document in the province, and then we have the bylaws for every municipality to ensure that they address the issues related to the draft.
Any more questions on the?
No, but your mic has stopped working. So I'm going to give you that one to speak
No,
into.
because I'm going to go.
I mean, turn it off.
Oh, you can?
I think, no.
Maybe the battery died?
Yeah.
You can talk into that. And then
Okay.
we'll do that.
All right, we have a question there?
Years ago, I had a house renovated.
Doesn't mean anything anymore.
Yeah. This concept of the return, it's called return period. Okay, it's like a flood, right? We talk about the 200-year flood or the 100-year flood, and that's what is used to determine how high the water will go. And if you are designing houses along the Fraser, you will be designing them for a 100-year flood that gives an estimate of how much the water will raise, and then you should be above that water. Okay. In an earthquake, we have the same concept of the return period. Doesn't mean that every 500 years you have the earthquake, but over the history, over 10,000 years, in average, there is a big earthquake every 500 years or 200 years. So when you talk about the 200-year earthquake compared to the 500-year earthquake or the 2,000-year earthquake, we're talking about shaking that is going to increase. Like the 200-year earthquake, the shaking is going to be, you're going to feel it, okay? But the 2,000-year earthquake is going to be the shaking that's going to destroy many things. So this is the idea of the 200-year event. In the building code, we use for design the 2,500-year event, okay, which is very severe ground motion. Okay. But that's why the buildings are conservatively designed to not to collapse to that level of ground motion, which means that if you have the 200-year event, the building is going to say, thank you, I'm okay. Yeah. But that's the idea. Yeah.
Perhaps I will wrap this up. Do we have any more questions online? Okay. Well, thank you, Carlos, for this fascinating and possibly terrifying little discussion. By the way, in either early February or late January, we had a session here with the Natural Resources Canada, and they are developing a website where you can go and look at your seismic risk at the postal code level. And it's now, and they're also assigning some level of risk to buildings based on the typical building in that postal code. So if you don't have a typical building, you'll have to ask an engineer.
Yeah,
possibly Carlos.
Those maps include the soil conditions.
Yeah, right.
So the soil conditions are built in that.
And you mentioned that there's this newly discovered fault going through downtown Victoria. One of the questions we had in this January session here with the geologist there as well, are there any big faults in this area, like down in Seattle? They know where quite a few of them are. He said, well, the ice age has sort of wiped away a lot of the evidence, so we're not sure. They could be there, but we won't know until it happens.
Yeah, you're right. But they're continuously looking for faults. If you look at the provincial maps from the Geological Survey, the BC Geological Survey, you'll see that the province is crisscrossed with faults everywhere. The question is that fault a potential for an earthquake, right? Mm-hmm. Because not all the faults are active. Right?
I see.
Yeah. So they are trying to identify if there is some seismic activity. And the example of the Leech River Mountain Devil Fault, which is that in Victoria, is that it hasn't been active for thousands of years. Right? Mm-hmm. But then started finding evidence that, it could get active. That's why it's now included in design tools.
Anyway, just before we wrap up, I'd like to make a pitch for anybody who's here in the audience or in the Zoom audience or the Gmail component, that we're having an exercise at the Disaster Support Hub here in Saturday, May 27th, at the sea container down by the tennis courts here at the community center. And we're going to have an exercise where we pretend that there's been a disaster, and people who are needing help or can provide help turn up, and we register those kinds of issues and link people up together. Also have some radio patrols. Every community center in Vancouver has, at least in theory, a disaster support hub. Well, Dunbar actually has one. So please come out and participate or watch what we're doing. All right. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
The community center may not be standing.
Thanks.
And Brian, I'm aware you want to say hi to Carlos, so I'll just get him over there.
I already said hi.
Well,
I wanted to say hi to you, Christian. I want to say hi to everyone. Uh-oh. Looks like we lost the mic.
That's a bit tricky. Hold on, let me just stop recording.